Today, we're diving into a really important clinical trial called PEACE-2. And believe me, its findings sent a very clear message to doctors who treat high-risk prostate cancer. It all kicked off with one simple but really crucial question.
So the big idea behind this whole multi-year study was actually pretty simple. Researchers had this drug that worked well in the late stages of prostate cancer, after the disease had already spread. So they asked, what if we use that exact same drug but way earlier? Could we stop the cancer in its tracks before it even gets a chance to become a late-stage problem?
Okay, so what is this drug we're talking about? It's a chemotherapy called cabazitaxel, and it's already a proven winner for men whose cancer has spread and isn't responding to other treatments. So the question for the PEACE-2 trial was this: what if we take this powerful weapon from the last line of defense and move it to the very first? Could it be a total game changer for men whose cancer is still contained but is looking really dangerous?
All right, so to test this big idea, you need a really well-designed experiment. So let's break down exactly who they studied, what the treatments were, and how the whole trial was put together.
The researchers were super specific about the patient group here. They were only looking at men with what's called very high-risk localized disease. That means their cancers looked aggressive under a microscope, a high Gleason score, they were pretty big, and their PSA blood tests were high. But here's the key part. Scans showed the cancer had not spread yet. This is exactly the group you'd want to hit hard and early.
The trial itself was a really clean head-to-head comparison. Everyone, and I mean every single patient, got the best standard of care we have: long-term hormone therapy, which is also called ADT, plus high-dose radiation. The only difference between the two groups was that one of them also got 4 cycles of cabazitaxel. That way, if there was any difference in how they did, you'd know for sure it was because of the chemo.
Now, you might hear the fancy scientific term for this, which is a 2x2 factorial design. That's just a clever way for researchers to test 2 different questions inside the same trial. But for what we're talking about today, we're just focused on the big one. Does adding this chemo actually help?
So, with the trial all set up, the next big question is, how do you measure success? What are you actually looking for? Well, the main goal, what scientists call the primary endpoint, was something called clinical progression-free survival. We'll just call it CPFS.
So what does that actually mean in plain English? Basically, they were looking for any sign that the treatment wasn't working. That could mean the cancer came back in the prostate, or it spread somewhere else in the body, or unfortunately, if a patient passed away from any cause. The hope, of course, was that the group getting chemo would go a lot longer before any of those things happened.
All right, now for the part everyone was waiting for. After following these men for around 7 years, the data was finally in. And the answer it gave, well, it was not what many people were expecting at all.
Take a look at this chart. It pretty much tells the main story right here. It shows the percentage of men who were still free of cancer progression after 6 years. And you can see the bars are almost identical. In fact, if you look closely, the group that got standard care alone did a tiny bit better. This was the first huge clue. Adding chemo wasn't helping stop the cancer's return. And when you look at the actual numbers, it gets even clearer. At that 6-year mark, 71.4% of the guys who just got standard care were doing great, progression-free. But in the group that got the extra chemotherapy, that number was actually a little lower, at 67.2%. I mean, that's a completely surprising result. Now, the key statistic that wraps this all up is called the hazard ratio. It came in at 1.11. All you really need to know is that any number over 1.0 suggests the new treatment isn't any better, and maybe even a little worse. So this number basically confirmed what we saw in the percentages. The cabazitaxel just wasn't helping.
Okay, so maybe it didn't stop the cancer from coming back, but did it help patients live longer? That's the ultimate question, right? And the answer there was also a clear no. There was literally no difference in overall survival between the two groups. Now, the good news is that survival was fantastic in both groups, over 85%, which is great. But again, it just shows the chemo didn't add anything to that positive outcome.
So not only was there no benefit, there was actually a real downside. This chart shows the rate of serious side effects, what doctors call toxicity. In the group that got the cabazitaxel, a whopping 65% of patients had these kinds of side effects. That's compared to just 47% in the standard care group. So the chemo added real harm without any of the benefit everyone was hoping for.
So what's the final verdict here? What does all of this mean? Well, the conclusion from the PEACE-2 trial is pretty definitive, and it's going to have a real, immediate impact on how doctors treat this disease.
You don't have to take my word for it. The people who actually ran the trial summed it up perfectly. They said,
chemotherapy intensification in this setting is probably not the right strategy. When the investigators say it that plainly, you listen. The idea of hitting this cancer early with this specific chemo just did not work.
So let's boil this entire massive trial down to the basics. Adding early chemo didn't help patients stay cancer-free longer. It didn't help them live longer. But what it did do was cause a lot more harmful side effects. The bottom line here is crystal clear. For men in this situation, you do not add this chemotherapy to their treatment.
And, a negative result like this is actually incredibly valuable. It reinforces what the best treatment really is. The standard of care is still long-term hormone therapy combined with powerful radiotherapy. That's the proven path, and Piece 2 just confirmed that there's no reason to add upfront cabazitaxel into that mix.
And all of this leaves us with one last really fascinating question. Remember that over 85% of these guys, all considered very high risk, were alive after 7 years, no matter which group they were in. So, does that mean our current standard treatments are actually way more effective for this high-risk group than we used to think? It's a really provocative thought, and it just goes to show how a trial that fails can still succeed by pushing our whole understanding of cancer treatment forward.